like to welcome everybody to the Seaman's Bethel. My name is Phil Olivera. I'm the president of the New Bedford Port Society, which oversees the grounds and the properties, the Seaman's Bethel and the Mariners Home that you're at today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the historic Seaman's Bethel to celebrate the dedication of Stephanie Rocknack's statue, Herman Melville, whose connection Stephanie and the rest of the team to bring this to fruition. Whose connection to New Bedford helped inspire the preeminent work of American literature. The New Bedford Port Society was formed or founded in 1830 by local civic leaders and clergy to provide moral and spiritual guidance to the city's growing population of sailors and whalemen. 2 years later, in 1832, the Bethel was built as a place of worship, reflection, and comfort for those whose lives were tied to the sea. Today, the Port Society is dedicated to preserving and promoting the historic Seaman's Bethel and Mariners Home, honoring the spiritual, cultural, and maritime heritage of New Bedford. The Bethel continues to serve as both an active place of worship and one of New Bedford's most treasured historic landmarks. Now let's come to the reason about today. In 1841, Herman Melville attended service right here in this Bethel and sat in a pew in the southeast corner of the building before embarking on a voyage on the Acushnet that would profoundly shape his writing. 10 years later, he published Moby Dick, forever linking the Seaman's Bethel to American literature through the memorable sermon delivered by the fictional Father Mathel. In recognition of its literary significance, the Bethel was designated a literary landmark by the American Library Association in 1962 and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. For its important role in preserving America's maritime heritage. While preserving New Bedford's history is a central part of our work, the Port Society also continues traditions that honor those who make their living on the water, even today. Each year, we host the Remembrance and Blessing of the Fleet. It's done in May on Memorial Day, remembering fishermen lost at sea from the port of New Bedford. And you'll see those cenotaph and tablets on the walls around you. Please take a moment at some time later on to look at them. Today's statue installation celebrates the enduring connection between literature, maritime history, and this remarkable place. I'd like to now introduce our MC for today's event, Rosemary Gill, the president and CEO of the Citerium.
Good morning.
Thank you, Phil. Before we continue with today's program, I'd like to recognize the elected officials at today's event. I believe we have State Representative Mark Sylvia here and City Councilor at Large James Roy. Thank you. We are also grateful for the contributions of former Mayor John Bullard on this project, which works. I want to thank the New Bedford Port Society for its partnership and stewardship of this historic site. The Seaman's Bethel is the heart of the story, both as the place where Herman Melville's imagination was sparked and as a living reminder of New Bedford's maritime heritage. I also want to recognize the many donors who made this statue possible. More than 50 individuals contributed to this project, demonstrating how deeply the city values Herman Melville's connection to New Bedford. Peter Blatchford, whose generous contribution provided significant support toward bringing this vision to reality. We also want to remember and honor the late Bruce Olivera, former president of the Port Society. Along with his good friend, the late Fred Toomey, Bruce was a driving force behind the restoration of New Bethel. He instantly recognized the importance of this statue to New Bedford and worked collaboratively with the city to ensure its long-term stewardship here on the grounds of the Bethel. This project also benefited from the thoughtful guidance of a dedicated selection committee. Their expertise, care, and appreciation for Melville's legacy helped identify the artist whose vision could best capture the spirit of this place. We thank each of those members: Janet Barboza, Alexandra Copeland, Amy DeRosia, Imelda Laxton, Jim Lopes, Ann Laurel, Arpa Mata, Bruce Olivero, Margot Saulnier, Jennifer Smith, and Dr. Robert Wallace. I also want to thank the work of New Bedford City Solicitor Eric Jakes, Chief Operating Officer Christina Connolly, Whaling Museum President and CEO Amanda McMullen, Sylvia De Silva, and the Department of Public Infrastructure. And of course, special thanks to the foundry that worked on this project, UAP, especially Senior Project Manager Mark Shorter. I want to single out the exceptional work of Janet Barboza, the Mayor's Director of Special Projects, and quarterback of this project. Janet worked tirelessly to ensure that the selection process was competitive and that the work to complete the statue was executed at a high level from start to finish. Now I'd like to introduce someone whose leadership has made this day possible. John Mitchell is New Bedford's 38th mayor. His tenure as mayor has been marked by dramatic improvements in public safety, high graduation rates, the city's finances, and its physical appearance, along with the modernization of the Port of New Bedford and the construction of new parks, waterfront walkways, and other compelling public spaces. His leadership also has elevated New Bedford's status as a leading center for the arts and historic preservation. During his tenure, the city has made transformative investments in its cultural institution, including the Zeitarian, the Whaling Museum, the New Bedford Art Museum, and much more. His administration also established Massachusetts' first dedicated municipal arts fund, paving the way for New Bedford's first comprehensive strategic arts and culture plan. Mayor Mitchell also has championed efforts to expand opportunities for artists and creative organizations, including his leadership to reopen the former Star Store building as a regional arts hub. In 2023, Americans for the Arts, the nation's leading organization for the promotion of art in American cities, awarded him its prestigious Public Leadership of the Arts Award. And fittingly for today's celebration, the idea for a Herman Melville statue in New Bedford originated with Mayor Mitchell in September 2023, an idea which comes to fruition today. Please join me in welcoming Mayor John Mitchell.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
So, when you first look at a statue of a historic figure that is larger than life size or perched high on a pedestal, there's a temptation to presume that that person was destined for greatness. And it's understandable. After all, erecting erecting a statue to a particular person is an act of exaltation. It's an invitation for others to admire that person. But the reality is that greatness is never preordained. In the year 1840, Herman Melville was an unemployed 21-year-old from New York with 6 years of formal schooling. Although he was a precocious writer and had intermittently studied the classics as a teenager, he had failed to hold down a steady job after trying his hand as a law clerk, as a teacher, and as a merchant seaman. Nothing in his life to that point foretold the possibility that he would experience high achievement or contribute much to society. But his decision that year to travel to New Bedford, try his hand at a new line of work, would change everything. What he experienced in the following 2 years would expand his worldview and consciousness, and would supply him with the major elements of a story for the ages. Melville arrived here having decided, like the young men observed by Ishmael reeling about the streets of New Bedford, to join the great whale fishery. He attended a service right here in this chapel. It sat in the southeast corner. The same one where Father Maple would deliver his sermon about Jonah and the whale. The next day, Melville sailed out on the bark Acushnet on a voyage that would take him to the vast whaling grounds of the Pacific Ocean. Just as Ishmael explains that his whaling voyage served as his college education, so it was with Melville. For 18 months, he boarded with crew before the mast, hunted whales, and in between contemplated the vastness of the sea and sky. As was not uncommon among whalemen of this period, he eventually abandoned ship in the South Seas and lived among the indigenous Polynesian tribes, befriending them as Ishmael would Queequeg. During the voyage, Melville began to hear the story of the Nantucket whaler Essex, which 20 years before was sunk by an enraged bull sperm whale. In a moment of serendipity, the Acushnet encountered a Nantucket whaler near the same latitude as the Essex sank. During the gam between the two vessels that followed, Melville met the son of Owen Chase, the first mate of the Essex, who lent Melville a copy of his father's manuscript of the Essex saga, which Melville, of course, promptly read that night. The Pequod thus would meet a similar fate to that of the Essex. At the risk of gross understatement, there is much that can be said about the novel that emerged from this experience. In this 200-year-old church, without modern air conditioning, I am not about to inflict on this audience my armchair literary views. There is for those who don't know it, there is a 3-day Melville Symposium now underway across the street at the Whaling Museum, where there will be much more said about Moby Dick with much greater authority. But I will offer this. Why Moby Dick remains compelling to this day is a matter of lively and edifying debate. But we can agree that it invites us to consider timeless questions, like these. Is the American version of democracy, which at that moment was careening towards civil war, prone to self-destruction? How do we ascribe meaning to our seemingly arbitrary world? I had a college professor on this score who insisted that the chapter, The Whiteness of the Whale, was the most important one in the book. Do we have free will? Is Ahab Ahab? Is it I, God, or who that lifts this arm? And there's so much more. It is for good reason that Moby Dick has been called America's Bible. Like the Bible, we return to Moby Dick in part because there is new understanding to be discovered with every reading. Its imprint on American culture has been broad and indelible. It is the most famous work of prose in the English language. It has inspired the emulation of countless authors, playwrights, musicians, and painters the world over. It is the most assigned novel on college campuses, as I suspect some folks in this room can attest. It has shaped America's identity. So it is entirely fitting today, on the grounds of this chapel where he once worshipped, having been drawn to New Bedford's great whale fishery, we dedicate a statue of Herman Melville, whose magnum opus continues to call us to reflect deeply on our place in the world. We do so recognizing that public statuary is meant to convey something also about those who do the dedicating. This work, the work we are about to reveal, also tells a story about New Bedford and its place in America, in Melville's time and today. New Bedford in 1850 epitomized the spirit of the nation. Barely a half century after the end of the Revolution, America was expanding rapidly and unabashedly into a bi-coastal country. Cities were springing up, canals and railroads began to cross the land, and thanks to vast natural resources, seemingly endless fertile land, and revolutionary innovations, its economic output was beginning to exceed that of every major European power. High seas whaling was arguably the most American of industries. It operated according to an audacious proposition that men would sail across the world for 3 to 5 years at a time in wooden vessels and hunt the largest creatures in the sea with hand weapons. It was fraught with danger, of course, and modern estimates are that nearly a third of the vessels would not return. But in its heyday, it was incredibly lucrative, exceeding the profit margins of even today's most successful technology companies. New Bedford was the epicenter of all of them. By the 1850s, nearly half of the whaling vessels in the world were home ported here, making New Bedford the wealthiest city in the United States. Its waterfront was a beehive of activity, and its fleet of whale ships made New Bedford known in every corner of the world. By virtue of the city's global connectedness and its egalitarian sensibilities, of its Quaker founders, New Bedford had America's first truly multicultural workforce, both at sea and on land. Just as remarkably, according to one historian, New Bedford had the highest per capita population of former slaves of any northern city. At once, antebellum New Bedford manifested the ambitious heights of American capitalism and the possibility that America could begin to realize the core ideals of the Declaration of Independence at a moment when the country was struggling intensely with the question of what those ideals meant. In the opening chapters of Moby Dick, Ishmael gushes about New Bedford. He explains that New Bedford has effectively monopolized the business of whaling, which has yielded stunning prosperity. Nowhere in America, he said, will you find more patrician-like houses, gardens more opulent than in New Bedford. Ishmael is enthralled with seemingly everything he encounters as he strolls through the streets. The ubiquitous smell of flowers in the air, the majesty of the tree-lined streets, the omnipotence of art, and even the beauty of the women of New Bedford. Yet Ishmael makes clear that New Bedford isn't merely an enclave of wealthy merchants. More than the world's other major seaports, New Bedford is teeming with people from other places, from New England farmhands to cannibals of the South Pacific, all of them contributing to a roaring economic engine. What is unmistakable in these passages is that to Melville, New Bedford is America at its finest. A city is not just a point on a map. It's not just the sum of its streets and buildings. It consists of its people and the stories they choose to tell about themselves. These stories are the threads of civic identity, which makes community possible and enables common purpose. It is, especially in times of division, it's what holds us all together. A statue is a means of making a story physically present. It proclaims something about who we are. It doesn't require you to open up a book. It's there for anyone to behold. The statue we are about to reveal, brilliantly conceived by Stephanie Rocknack and the ambitious spirit of Melville himself, is meant to tell the story of the New Bedford that Melville recognized. Audacious, outward looking, diverse, egalitarian, and resolute. Like Jonah of Father Mapple's famous sermon, it is a city willing to preach the truth in the face of falsehood. We are reminded in this Hallett Hall that this story is not merely a figment of memory. The cenotaphs memorializing those lost at sea, the ones that Ishmael pondered as he sat in that pew, continue to serve the same purpose here in America's preeminent commercial fishing port. As they did in Melville's day, they offer solace to family members who have no grave to visit. But they also enshrine the daring and resolve of those among us who have gone to sea in ships. Each of them is part of the still unfolding, unique, and deeply American story of New Bedford. My hope is that the statue we dedicate today will enrich and amplify that story and make our residents even more proud to tell it to those who follow us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchell, for making today possible. Today's celebration is more than the unveiling of a work of public art. It is also an opportunity to reflect on Herman Melville's enduring literary legacy and the profound connection between Moby Dick, the Seaman's Bethel, and New Bedford. To help us do that, we're honored to welcome one of the nation's leading Melville scholars. Dr. Robert Wallace is a professor of English in the College of Arts and Science at Northern Kentucky University. He earned his PhD in English from Columbia University and has devoted much of his academic career to the study of Herman Melville, American literature, and maritime history. He is a founding member of the Melville Society Cultural Project and served on the selection committee that helped guide the creation of the Herman Melville statue we celebrate today. Dr. Wallace is the author of several books and scholarly works on Herman Melville, including Douglas and Melville Anchored Together in Neighborly Style. His research has deepened our understanding of Melville's work and of New Bedford's lasting influence on one of America's greatest novels. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Wallace.
First, I want to thank President O'Hara, Mayor Mitchell, Jennifer Bosa for all who have made this amazing day possible. What an honor it is to be speaking in this pulpit, in this chapel, in this city, and on this day. As I prepared these remarks, I kept thinking about how the Port of New Bedford gave young Herman Melville his passport to the peoples of the world, the creatures of the sea, and his own evolving global ecological imagination. There were two Melvilles: the desperate young man who sailed out on the Acushnet to the South Seas in 1841, and the accomplished novelist who published Moby Dick 10 years later in 1851. There are also two Ishmaels who narrate Moby Dick: the depressed young man who sailed out on the voyage of the Pequod, and the skillful storyteller who ends his story with this quote from the book of Job: "I only am escaped alone to tell them." This pulpit, as described by Ishmael in chapter 8 of Moby Dick, is one of the most famous pulpits in American literature. It is the pulpit from which Father Mapple gave one of the most famous sermons in American literature. It is the pulpit from which Orson Welles delivered Father Mapple's sermon in the film that premiered here in New Bedford in 1956. That film brought not only Moby Dick, but New Bedford into our national imagination in a new way. This chapel, as described by Ishmael in chapter 7 of Moby most sacred places in New Bedford itself today. We at this moment are surrounded by marble tablets commemorating the lives of New Bedford sailors who have died at sea, either in the whaling industry in Melville's day or in the commercial fishery since. Herman Melville saw some of these actual tablets when he visited this chapel before sailing out on the Acushnet in 1841. 10 years later, Ishmael saw the same marble tablets in this chapel before sailing out on the Pequot. Feeling the emotion of the worshipers and mourners who filled this space we occupy today, Ishmael speaks for Melville as well as ourselves as he honors all those who placelessly perished without a grave. The city of New Bedford, as described in the early chapters of Moby Dick, is one of the most memorable cities in American literature. One reason for this is a sequence of chapters in which Ishmael describes what he sees, feels, and hears in this chapel from this pulpit as Father Maple delivers his sermon. New Bedford is also memorable for Ishmael's description in chapter 6 of the amazing spirit and enterprise of its civic and economic leaders in creating such a beautiful and prosperous city from what sailors have harpooned, harvested, and processed from the other side of the world. In the 4 chapters before that one, Ishmael had already given us a sampling of where the people who did much of the harvesting and harpooning and processing worshiped, slept, ate, and congregated. In chapter 2, Ishmael arrives in the city on a frigid winter night, needing a place to stay, but with little money in his purse. After walking down Union Street, past 2 places he could not possibly afford, he sees a light shining from a dark side street where he hopes he might find a bed. Entering the building, he awkwardly bumps into an ash box and finds himself covered in particles of ash. Passing through the inner door, he realizes that he's in a black church when he sees 100 black faces turning around to look at him. A powerful black preacher is preaching about the blackness of darkness. Embarrassed, Ishmael quickly exits and continues his search for a bed. Chapter 3, the Spouter Inn, has one of the most famous beds in American literature. Entering the Spouter Inn, Ishmael sees a dark, ominous, chaotic painting in which a whale is impaling himself on the 3 mastheads of a ship. A boisterous crew emerges that has just returned from a 3-year voyage hunting whales in the South Seas. The innkeeper tells Ishmael that he has no room for him, but suggests he might want to share a bed with a sailor who is still out on the town trying to sell his head. Ishmael is frightened to death when Queequeg, with his darkly tattooed face, enters the room. But the next morning, when they wake up together under the counterpane, with Queequeg's arm thrown over him in a loving manner, one of the great friendships in world literature begins. After Ishmael and Queequeg eat their breakfast with a miscellaneous group of sailors with various skin colors, they take a stroll through streets filled with whalers from all the isles and ends of the earth. These men are the international workers of the world who enabled New Bedford to become known as the city that lights the world, from the whale oil and spermaceti its ships have harvested from the oceans of the world. Ishmael gets to know such workers, and so do we, throughout the fictional voyage of the Pequot. Melville himself, like Ishmael in the novel, had sailed through oceans and then swam through libraries. But readers of Moby Dick in the early 1850s liked the action on oceans much more than the knowledge from libraries. The novel got mixed reviews and sold far fewer copies than Melville or his publishers had hoped. Moby Dick was pretty much unread from the mid-1850s until Melville's death in 1891. The Melville we are celebrating today is the young author who wrote a novel about whaling 10 years after sailing from New Bedford. Wrote the novel and only began to be widely appreciated a whole century after he wrote it. Rockwell Kent's illustrated edition of Moby Dick in 1930, followed by the academic revival of Moby Dick in the 1940s, helped to inspire the film that brought Melville's story to a much wider audience after premiering here in New Bedford. In the 1960s, many writers, artists, and readers began to see Moby Dick as the great American novel. Even now, 60 years later, in the 2020s, Moby Dick is still one of the great American novels, not only in America, but all around the world. Appreciation of Moby Dick has remained high and widespread for all these years, but in each successive decade, for different reasons, as the needs of the world change. First it was Ahab's book, then it was Ishmael's book, then it was Queequeg's book, and now in the 21st century, most students see it as Moby Dick's book, a book about the diversity and worth of whales and other living creatures of the sea, and about the responsibility of the peoples of the world to live in harmony with the natural world that sustains our lives. This change is reflected in the new motto that the New Bedford Whaling Museum adopted soon after our Melville Society Cultural Project officially affiliated with the museum in 2001, from pursuit to preservation. That motto encapsulates the process Ishmael went through as he learned more and more about the whales he and his crewmates were chasing during the voyage of the Pequod. From pursuit to preservation also encapsulates the process Melville's own mind went through as his novel kept changing as he was writing it. By the beginning of the 21st century, the transition from pursuit to preservation was pervading the hearts and minds of people throughout the world, not just those of students in my classes. To show how interpretations of Moby Dick have changed since Melville published the novel in 1851, I will present a few examples from early in the book. We are now much more aware than before that Moby Dick does not begin with the words, "Call me Ishmael." Ishmael begins the book with etymology, a one-page list of the words for whale in 13 different languages. He then presents extracts, his, quote, glancing bird's eye view of what has been promiscuously thought, fancied, and sung of revival by many nations and generations, including our own. Each of these introductions presents diverse ways of knowing and admiring the whale from a variety of cultures. Many of us in the Melville Society began to see the phrase, "Call me Ishmael," in a different way at our international conference in Rome in 2011. Most of us have always associated the word Ishmael with its Judeo-Christian meaning as castaway or outcast. In Rome, we met professors from Algeria and Iran whose students interpreted "Call me Ishmael" in a very different way from their own Islamic religion tradition, in which Ishmael is a founder and a prophet. I I wondered if Melville would have welcomed that interpretation too. And I found that a few months before he began writing the novel, The Literary World, the New York publication with which he was most closely associated, published a sophisticated essay about the Islamic religion, so detailed that it explained the difference between the Sunni and the Shiites. That is a distinction most Americans living today would not have been able to make until 9/11. I had always been curious about Ishmael's awkward visit to the black church in chapter 2 of Moby Dick. The Seaman's Bethel, in which we sit today, has often been featured in writings about New Bedford, but I had never seen that black church featured in that way. I had read about all the manual labor Frederick Douglass had performed after arriving in New Bedford in 1838, so I wondered how he might have been listed in the city directory when young Melville arrived in town. I was surprised to see Frederick Douglass listed as a preacher at the AME Zion Church on 2nd Street. Did Melville, like Ishmael, visit that church while he was in town? Was Frederick Douglass the preacher that Ishmael, or even Melville himself, heard preaching in that church? Preaching about the blackness and darkness. Much later in life, Douglass looked back, quote, to the days I spent in Little Zion, New Bedford, as among the happiest days of my life. He recalled that he, quote, often occupied the pulpit at the request of the preacher in charge. It was from this Zion church that I went forth to the work of delivering my brethren from bondage. Ishmael's description of the times he and Queequeg shared that bed together in the Spouter Inn, sometimes as a cozy, loving pair, caused a lot of my students in the 1980s to wonder if there was a sexual component to their friendship. By the turn of the century, that was no longer, for most students, a pressing concern. I will close my extract with one example from chapter 7 that shows in one small way how a book like Moby Dick can reveal much more when we read it a second time. The first time we enter this chapel with Ishmael and see the marble tablets on the wall and the worshipers who are silently mourning those who have placelessly perished without a grave, we think with Ishmael of the loved ones whose worshipers, worshipers have lost at sea. When we enter the same chapel with Ishmael after having read the story he has already told us, including the epilogue in which we learn that he is the sole survivor of the voyage of the Pequod, we mourn with him all of his crewmates and all the whales who have placelessly perished without a grave. Melville died in 1891 with Moby Dick largely unknown. Since then, a growing number of artists and a growing number of genres have resurrected his life, his work, and his spirit in creations of their own, speaking to the needs of their own day through their own thoughts, feelings, and intuitions, and about how the life Melville lived and the art he created can enrich our lives today. I'm sure I speak for everyone in this chapel today in thanking Mayor Mitchell and his fellow collaborators in the city of New Bedford for commissioning a public sculpture of Herman Melville. And Stephanie, we are all grateful to you for creating a sculpture that will give us all much to see, to think about, to feel, and to share with each other when we assemble outside for the lifting of the veil. I think it is very fitting that your sculpture of Herman Melville here next to the Seaman's Bethel, is joining the public sculpture of Frederick Douglass that was unveiled 3 years ago on Abolition Road on 7th Street. Melville and Douglass were each writers and thinkers who deeply honored all those workers of the world who shaped our lives with their hands, hearts, and lives. Douglass once wrote that the shipyard was my schoolhouse. Melville wrote, in the words of Ishmael, that a whale ship was my Yale College and my Harvard. Thank you very much.
Since we've gathered, I've noticed we have another elected official here who now has walked away, or maybe taken a seat, but City Councilor Joe Lopes has joined us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Wallace. That really was outstanding. I feel like it was just like a great college class. Really wonderful. Before we hear from the artist herself, I'd like to recognize someone who played an important role in bringing this project from an idea to a finished work of public art. Margot Salme, Director of New Bedford Creative, has been a driving force behind the city's cultural work and was the chair of the selection committee that helped choose an artist for this important project. Please welcome Margot Salme.
Father, M-A-P-P-L-E, is pronounced Maple. But I bow to the consensus of the room. Chapter 9 of Herman Melville's Moby Dick centers around a sermon given on a dark and stormy night in the snug protection of the fictional twin of this very chapel in the 1830s or 1840s by the fictional Father Matt, who was himself a seaman before he was a preacher, just as Melville was a seaman before he was a novelist. The sermon's theme is the novel's theme: man's doomed defiance of God and nature. And I've been asked to read some excerpts from that sermon, and here goes. Father Mapple rose, and in a mild voice of unassuming authority, ordered the scattered people to condense. There was a low rumbling of heavy sea boots among the benches, and a still slighter shuffling of women's shoes. And all was quiet again, and every eye on the preacher. He paused a little, and kneeling in the pulpit's bows, folded his large brown hands across his chest, uplifted his closed eyes, and offered a prayer so devoutly, deeply devout, that it seemed kneeling and praying at the bottom of the sea. This ended in prolonged, solemn tones like the continual tolling of a bell in a ship that is foundering at sea in a fog. In such tones he commenced reading the following hymn, but changing his manner towards the concluding stanzas, burst forth with appealing exultation and joy. The ribs and terrors in the whale arched over me a dismal gloom, while all God's sunlit waves rolled by and lift me deepening down to doom. I saw the opening maw of hell, with endless pains and sorrows there, which none but they that feel can tell. Oh, I was plunging to despair. In black distress, I called my God, when I could scarce believe him mine. Awful, yet bright, as lightning shone the face of my deliverer God. My song forever shall record that terrible, that joyful hour. I give the glory to my God, his all the mercy and the power. A brief pause ensued, preacher slowly turned over the leaves of the Bible, and at last, folding his hand down upon the proper page, said, "Beloved shipmates," clinched the last verse of the first chapter of Jonah. And God had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. Shipmates, this book is one of the smallest strands in the mighty cable of the scriptures. Yet, what a pregnant lesson to us is this prophet. What a noble thing is that canticle in the fish's belly. We feel the floods surging over us. We sound with him to the kelpy bottom of the waters. Seaweed and all the slime of the sea is about us. But what is this lesson that the book of Jonah teaches? As sinful men, it is a lesson to us all, because it is a story of the sin, hard-heartedness, suddenly awakened fears, the swift punishment, repentance, prayers, and finally, the deliverance and joy of Jonah. As with all sinners among men, the sin of the son of Amittai was in his willful disobedience of the command of God. Never mind now what that command was, or how conveyed, which he found a hard command. But all the things that God would have us do are hard for us to do. Remember that. If we obey God, we must disobey ourselves. And it is in this disobeying ourselves wherein the hardness of obeying God consists. And now behold Jonah, taken up as an anchor and dropped into the sea. He goes down in the whirling heart of such a massless commotion that he scarce heeds the moment when he drops seething into the yawning jaws awaiting him. And the whale shoots through all his ivory teeth like so many white bolts upon his prison. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly. But observe his prayer and learn a weighty lesson. For sinful as he is, Jonah does not weep and wail for direct deliverance. He leaves all the deliverance to God, contenting himself with this. Despite of all his pains and pangs, he will still look towards his holy temple. And here, shipmates, is true and faithful repentance. Not clamorous for pardon, but grateful for punishment. Shipmates, I do not place Jonah before you to be copied for his sin, but I do place him before you as a model for repentance. Sin not, but if you do, take heed to repent. Repent of it like Jonah. And now came a lull in his look as he silently turned over the leaves of the book once more. And at last, standing motionless with closed eyes for a moment, seemed communing with God and himself. But again he leaned over towards the people, and bowing his head lowly with an aspect of the deepest yet manliest humility, he spake these words: Shipmates, God has laid but one hand upon you. Both his hands press upon me. I have read you by what with murky light may be mine the lesson that Jonah teaches to all sinners, and therefore to ye, and still more to me, for I am a greater sinner than you. As ye have seen, God came upon him in a whale, and swallowed him down with living gulfs of doom, and with swift slantings tore him along into the midst of the seas, where the eddying depths sucked him 10,000 fathoms down, and the weeds were wrapped about his head, and all the watery world of woe bowled over him. Yet even then, beyond the reach of any plummet, out of the belly of hell, when the whale grounded upon the ocean's utmost bones, even then, God heard the engulfed, repenting prophet, and he cried. Then God spake unto the fish, and from the shuddering cold and blackness of the sea, the whale came reaching up towards the warm and pleasant sun, and all the delights of air and earth, and vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. When the word of the Lord came a second time, and Jonah, bruised and beaten, his ears like two seashells, still multitudinously murmuring of the ocean, Jonah did the Almighty's bidding. And what was that, shipmates? To preach the truth to the face of falsehood. That was it. This, shipmates, is to him who seeks to pour oil upon the waters when God has brewed them into a gale. Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall. Woe to him whose good name is more to him than goodness. Woe to him who in this world courts not dishonor. Yea, woe to him who, as the great pilot Paul has it while preaching to others, is himself a castaway. But oh, shipmates, on the starboard hand of every woe, there is a sure delight. And higher the top of that delight than the bottom of the woe is deep. Is not the main truck higher than the kelson is low? Delight is to him a far, far upward and inward delight, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth ever stands forth his own inexorable self. Delight is to him whose strong arms yet support him when the ship of this base, treacherous world has gone down beneath him. Delight is to him who gives no quarter in the truth, and kills, burns, and destroys all sin, though he pluck it out from under the robes of senators and judges. Delight, top gallant delight is to him who acknowledges no law or Lord, but the Lord his God, and is only a patriot to heaven. Delight is to him whom all the waves of the billows of the seas of the boisterous mob can never shake from this sure keel of the ages. And eternal delight and deliciousness will be his, who coming to lay him down can say with his final breath, O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immoral, here I die. I have striven to be thine, more than to be this world's, or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man? That he he should live out the lifetime of his God